Hello students, we are going to discuss a very interesting topic now, non-documentary sources of information. You know, information is categorized into two aspects, documentary sources and non-documentary sources. So, now we are going to concentrate more on the non-documentary sources of informations in the subsequent slides. Now, origin of sources of information, if you see how the informations arrived, the beginning of information sources may be traced to man's earlier attempts to record thoughts, concepts, ideas and events. The visual may be said to have originated when first sketched the outline of an animal that he wished to hunt. As he returned to look again at his sketch, he became aware of an important fact, that the sketch had the power to refresh his memory of his original concept. So, with the awareness, the concept of information sources, its rudimentary form may be said to have arisen, and other precursors soon followed the visual component. So, what we are looking at it is that the every information which is extremely important for every person, even from the earlier days also. So, whatever informations or whatever act they have done, they have depicted the entire thing in the form of visuals. Now, some of these visuals are given in papyrus, like in paper, or some of these visuals are there in the walls, some of these visuals are engraved in different kinds of stones, which gives a clear picture that how that particular event or that particular component or that particular instance happened during that time. It gives a clear picture of that, and it depicted in those engraves or in those inscribes. So, origin of sources of information is a very important component, that how that actual information sources arrived to it. Now, how it all started? Early man recorded routes to good hunting and fishing areas, and maps began. So, see, this is a very important thing, like for example, every person wants to do hunting in a particular forest area using certain kind of instruments. Now, they have recorded this entire thing inscribed in a particular, what we call it, in a stone or in the caves. Now, that gives a clear depiction to the person that this place, these kind of animals were there, because animals pictures are there, and these kind of instruments are used for hunting purpose and all. Even that gives birth to different kinds of maps also. Locations were defined into it, and different finishing areas were given into it. So, this is extremely important into it. Man recorded his accomplishments and bibliographic sources arose like the Gilgamesh epic. For example, completed about 2000 BC, tells the story of a legendary Babylonian king and the biblical flood. So, what had exactly happened, the entire depiction was given in the Gilgamesh epic. So, this is a very historical perspective to it. Prototype of almanacs could be observed. Information ancient Egypt, the Nile, the famous Nile river, endless, pulsating, throbbing with life, is sources of life but unpredictable. The Nile overflowed its banks, the Egyptian recorded the event. So, you can see this kind of an almanac given that what exactly happened for the Egyptians during in the Nile river. So, all the instances, all the events related to that particular Nile were all shown there. So, when a flood comes, what kind of measures should be taken, or what is the kind of duration of that particular flood, or how it gets devastated over time period. So, that those depictions were all given. So, this is how the depiction of the earlier times were all shown there. The Nile overflowed again and the phenomena was recorded once again. As the years progressed, the Nile continued to overflow and the man continued to record the event. So, after every instance of the flooding of the Nile river, this entire thing was recorded and recorded and recorded. So, what happened? At the end of it, there was an entire information in the form of an almanac. It talks about the entire thing about that entire Nile river. So, it was very important to understand that. Now, by comparing the records and overflowing of the Nile, Egyptians noticed a correlation exists between the two and eventually found a pattern information, the timings of the floods. So, see the coverage, the location and the devastation time of the flood. So, how it is important. So, recording of those information is giving back to the same people that when actually that flood arises in the Nile river and how much devastation it has taken place. So, you can see that recording of those information was so important in those the inscriptions. So, the tacit knowledge of those people is getting converted into explicit knowledge. So, they began to refer to the records and for the records for prediction of the events. And another type of source, namely almanacs, it took its birth. So, compilation of a run of these almanac type records eventually enabled ancient Egyptians to predict the Nile's overflow. An almanac is a bibliographical source where maps and early reference sources recorded a great deal of information. Eventually, man yearned for a single work that would synthesize the information in these varied sources, and the principle underlying encyclopedias were born. From it came the encyclopedia. This is see from an almanac how the encyclopedia is taking a birth, such as the works of Aristotle, Varro and Pliny the elder, and reference books may be said to have their historical beginnings in these works, since these texts still exist at least in fragments. So, how different events are depicted and chronologically they are recorded after one or the other, and these informations were put together in a form of either almanacs or later on in the form of encyclopedias. So, it is extremely important that which particular resource you are going to non-documentary resource you are going to look into. So, that is a very important component, and how it is giving a birth. We are still talking about the earlier period of it, how the informations and the events are getting recorded over the time. See this picture. This is a very interesting, this is an ancient historical picture where even when person to person the information is interacted or information is shared with the people face to face, lot of tacit knowledge get exchanged, and that is how the tacit knowledge when get exchanged and it passes on to the other people too. So, these information have to, there is an information flow. We need to understand the information flow. So, there is an information flow from one person to the other, it is taking place, and these inscriptions also are there in given in different kinds of they have been this inscription, like for example, this particular picture is from a cave and where or from the walls where these inscriptions are all impregnated and they are all giving one or the other message of a particular source. So, this is another kind of a non-documentary source which we are looking at it. This is another one, another picture. Now, in this picture where you can see the king is sitting there and there are some people who are in front of him with some kind of discussions and all, and just above those people you can see even there are some writings which are inscribed. Well, you need a certain kind of a anthropological and historian style people to understand those, those syllables which are written there, but this picture itself depicts lot of information about a person and how this information are, on the form of a particular person giving the deliverables to these people. A king is talking to his people, how he is managing the, in his industry, his dynasty and all, everything is shown in this particular picture. So, a picture can show a kind of this stone made, inscriptions can give a very beautiful picture of an entire story. It can give birth to a very important story. So, this is we need to understand, and these how these inscriptions are actually related to different kinds of events, and they are related to in chronologically, they have been inscribed chronologically, because then only it gives birth to a complete information on that. Now, categories of information sources, categories documentary and non-documentary. We will just touch upon the documents are physical sources of information that are fit for physical handling, or they are record in some physical form. Non-documentary sources are live sources that provide information instantly. I mean, somebody is having a knowledge or informations in his mind and instantly he shares with you. So, that is a very important thing. Non-documentary sources of information include research organizations, societies, industries, government establishments, departments, learned and professional bodies, universities, technological institutions, etc. So, when you are organizing, when you are as a library information science professional and you are working in an organization or in some of these organizations which are listed here, you need to understand which are the documentary sources and which are the non-documentary sources. So, that gives you the first level of classificationing of it. Documentary sources classificationing, it could be different, but non-documentary sources you need to identify those non-documentary sources first, and then you can go for a classification system. So, you have to identify which are those non-documentary sources actually and what are the sources of it. So, these are very important things when you work in a particular organization to identify the documentary and the non-documentary sources. There are certain specific characteristics of non-documentary sources. Now, because this helps you to understand that what are those non-documentary sources. The non-documentary sources of information are live sources, which are extremely important in the process of communication, like we have seen in the picture. When a communication is taking place between two people, or a communication is taking place from a king and his subordinates. So, that is basically a communication process. If a scientist working on an experiment needs some information, he would turn to his or her colleague working in the same laboratory rather than to a printed page. Okay. So, this is some of the characteristics of a non-documentary sources. It is easier to have a dialogue with an expert than to use a bibliography or index or a card catalog or even a consultation with a reference librarian. Like for example, you visit to a library. So, if you have to go to and refer any bibliography, any index or a card catalog, suppose a user is there and he is visiting your library. So, the first thing he will prefer to have a one-to-one dialogue with you, to have a discussion with you on that particular thing. Non-documentary sources of information provide information instantly and is very easily to handle. Now, there are some disadvantages of non-documentary sources. The main disadvantage of non-documentary sources of information is that it involves high cost when distance between the people is large, and that it also demands the use of highly sophisticated techniques like computer system, video conferencing, telephone, etc. Authenticity and reliability if there is no documentary evidence. So, this is very important. You need to understand what is authenticity and reliability. Government establishments, departments, universities, technological institutions, data centers, information centers, referral centers, clearing houses, consultants, technological gatekeeper, etc. Non-documentary sources of information also includes discussion with colleagues, visitors, participants of seminars and conferences. So, these are some of the characteristics of non-documentary sources, from where the non-documentary sources are evolving. Now, what is the role of a library? The library, through the referral service, provides access to important non-documentary sources of information, which may include the following types. Like number 1, research association. Research association may establish a cooperative information centers. In such cases, there is a possibility of firm to firm discussion and exchange of information between the members of an association. The learned societies and professional institutions. So, we are taking each one of them one by one. A member of these bodies forms the core of a discipline or a profession. The headquarters staff help the members personally on professional matter, and sometimes they may direct the queries to the expert member of the body. Industrial liaison officer. These officers provide particularly the preliminary information needed to put a firm on the right track and for information which needs to be given personally and supported by practical advice in order to be fully effective. They visit the firms, explore their needs and problems and help them to find solutions, sometimes directly on the spot, more often by putting them in touch with specialized sources of information and assistance, or refer to some other specialist also. The most important thing is mass media. Mass media is a means of communication of information through broadcasting and telecasting, or a combination of these two for the masses, which is more effective than any other documentary sources. Like for example, this particular course where you are sending out the informations to the entire gamut of students are getting know about this particular course on this particular topic. So, this plays an extremely important role in the communication process, where from one channel entire crowd comes to know on a particular topic on that. Non-documentary sources, the categories, there are several categories we will look into now. First is humans. Under humans there are numerous categories. Some of the categories under the humans are like consultants. So, you need to understand which are the non-documentary sources you are referring to. You need to understand, because when you work in an organization there are several kind of people. So, number 1 is your consultants. A consultant is a professional who provides advice usually on payment basis. There are various categories of consultants such as legal consultant, engineering consultant, education consultant and many more. Experts. An expert is a person who possesses sound knowledge on a subject, technique and so on. On many occasions we take the help of these experts to solve some problems. Resource persons. A resource person is a person who have intellectual power for giving outputs as per the situation. Like for example, in this case I am a resource person, and on this particular topic we are discussing and I am communicating with all of you students. So, this is what is a resource person is. So, there is a difference between an expert and a resource person. Okay. Then your extension workers. The meaning of the extension worker is varies depending on the context. Please remember the word context. Examples of extension workers are agriculture extension worker, medical extension worker, etc. Representatives of firms. A representative is a person who is employed by a firm for sales promotion and allied activities. His or her activities among others include sales promotion, market survey, study of user reaction, identifying competitors in the field and locate prospective buyers and so on. Technological gatekeepers. A technological gatekeeper is a well informed person in a particular field, usually some scientist, technologist and professionals in business, etc., who have got a tendency to acquire information from various sources to keep himself abreast of the development in the field and to disseminate the information to the person or group who may be interested in the information. Last but not the least is the common man. In our day to day life, we come across plenty of common people and we get a large amount of information from them. The category 2 is on organization. Organization are also important sources of information. There are different categories of organizations and they provide different types of information. Information provided by an organization is generally considered to be authentic. When you are working in an organization, so you need to understand what kind of organizations you are. The first and the foremost thing is that you should understand your organization first. Whether you are in a government body, whether you are in an autonomous body, whether you are in a schools, you are in colleges, you are in research institutions or in a university or you are in multinational companies, small and medium enterprises, public sectors, multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations and consultancy firms. Because in each of these organizations there are different kind of people are there. And as we have seen in the previous slides, like there are humans, and under the category of human, in each of these organizations there are different types of people are there, different kinds of stakeholders are there. So, you need to understand in those organizations who are those stakeholders and with whom you are basically working with them. Because once you understand and interact with them, it is extremely important to know all these people in these specific organizations. Like if I take an example of multinational companies. In multinational companies, it is basically nothing but a global company, where you have consultants, you have researchers, you have topmost scientists, you have an academicians also, and you have different types of technological gatekeepers, but they are not from one location. They are globally present, their presence are global. So, when their presence are global, so it means their stakeholders, their customers are also global. So, when their customers are global, so what happens? The communication process with each one of them is different. So, we need to understand that. Let us take an example of small and medium enterprises. Now, these organizations are into small organizations, and these organizations are working on very specific areas. So, you can have different kinds of producers, you can have different kinds of consumers, you can have different kinds of vendors, you can have different kinds of people or technology experts, you can have different kinds of practitioners into that. So, what happens in these organizations, the people, the stakeholders are completely different, and so their communication process is also completely different. Then you have public sectors, you have multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations, organizations like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, SDC, European Union, delegation of the European Union, Ford Foundations, or you have the embassies. There you will find the different kinds of people are there. So, you need to understand which kind of human being you are basically interacting and having your communication. Now, when you do your communication process with all these people, there is an enormous amount of information is arising from them. They have their own tacit knowledge. Now, how these tacit knowledge gets converted into an explicit knowledge, that itself is a challenge. So, how their documentary knowledge it can be prepared based on their non-documentary, means their communication process can be converted into a documentary process after exchanging with them. So, it is extremely important. Like there is a consultancy firms, there are several kind of consultancy firms which could be global, which could be national, which could be local also. The consultancy firms working on specific areas, like for example, your consultancy firms like KPMG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, they are working on several issues. Basically, there you have the subject domain experts who are providing lot of information, lot of they are providing a helping hand to different kind of stakeholders. And this is very important. They do a lot of communication process. They provide solutions to these people, and when they provide solutions to these people, then it comes out in the form of a lot of documentary sources. It takes a shape also sometime. So, there is a lot of non-documentary sources helps in the consultancy firms also. So, you have several types of categories. So, there are two major categories we need to understand of non-documentary sources. Number one is your human beings, where you come across your different kind of people like consultants, technological gatekeepers, subject domain experts, researchers, scientists, and all these people may or may not be affiliated to some organizations, but most of them are organizations. And the second part is the organization itself. So, the information or the non-documentary sources which are taking birth from where you need to understand, from the people who are associated with the organization. So, non-documentary sources, as we sum up, see, non-documentary sources are also from the human beings, those who are giving their deliverables, and the organizations we are putting together, and they are also providing the entire information. So, since from the early days how the depiction of the informations in the form of information sources has taken birth, and from almanacs to encyclopedias to different kinds of non-documentary sources which are available throughout the world. So, this is extremely important as a library information science professional, that you need to understand what is a documentary sources and what is a non-documentary sources. When you work in an organization, what is a documentary source and what is a non-documentary source. Thank you.